Ethan Cole moved cautiously through the deserted streets of what used to be Seattle. The city was nothing more than a corpse of its former self, the once bustling roads now cluttered with abandoned cars, shattered glass, and decaying bodies. The smell of death clung to the air, mixing with the sickly sweet stench of rot. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, feeling the reassuring weight of his scavenged supplies. A half-full water bottle, a few protein bars, and a rusted combat knife, that was all he had to his name. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him alive for another day. The world had ended 6 months ago. No one had seen it coming. The first reports had called it a violent flu outbreak, bodies piling up in hospitals, mass panic. Then, the dead started coming back. By the time the government acknowledged the truth, the infection had spread across the globe. Cities fell. Governments collapsed. And now, Ethan was one of the last people left in a world overrun by the undead. A guttural moan echoed from a nearby alley. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He turned his head slowly, gripping the hilt of his knife. A single zombie stumbled out from the shadows. Its flesh was gray and peeling, its clothes stained with old blood. Its lifeless eyes locked onto Ethan, and it let out another raspy moan before staggering toward him. Ethan had learned long ago that hesitation meant death. He stepped forward quickly, ducking under the zombie's outstretched arms, and drove his knife into the side of its skull. The creature jerked violently before collapsing to the pavement. He exhaled, yanking his blade free. One down. But there were always more. As if on cue, a chorus of moans erupted from the street behind him. Ethan's stomach dropped. He turned to see a pack of zombies emerging from the ruins of a convenience store. At least 10 of them. Their heads snapped toward him the moment he moved. Shit. Ethan bolted. He weaved through the wreckage, dodging overturned cars and debris. The infected pursued him, their movements clumsy but relentless. His lungs burned as he sprinted down a side street, his boots slamming against the pavement. He needed a plan, fast. His eyes darted around, scanning for an escape. A fire escape ladder hung just a few feet above him on the side of an old apartment building. It was risky, but he had no choice. With every ounce of strength he had, Ethan leaped, fingers barely grasping the bottom rung. He scrambled up, heart hammering. The zombies reached the base of the ladder just as he pulled himself onto the platform. Their rotting hands stretched toward him, fingers clawing at the metal bars. But they couldn't climb. For now, he was safe. Panting, Ethan rested against the railing, looking down at the city below. The infected roamed aimlessly, a constant reminder that the world was no longer his. 6 months alone. 6 months of running, fighting, surviving. But for how much longer? He closed his eyes. He didn't have the answer. All he knew was that tomorrow, he would wake up and do it all over again. Because in this world, there was only one rule: keep moving. Ethan awoke to the distant sound of groaning. The infected never truly rested. Even now, as he sat perched on the rooftop of an old apartment building, they wandered aimlessly below, sniffing out any sign of life. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, sighing. He needed food. Water. Shelter. His supplies wouldn't last another day. Pushing himself to his feet, he scanned the streets below. A small gas station sat just a few blocks away. Its windows were shattered, but that didn't mean everything inside had been taken. It was a risk. But risks were necessary. Tightening the straps on his backpack, he climbed back down the fire escape, careful to avoid the reach of the infected that had lingered overnight. Once his feet hit the pavement, he crouched low and moved quickly, ducking behind rusted cars and overturned dumpsters, making sure to keep out of sight. The gas station loomed ahead. He approached cautiously, peering through the broken glass. Shelves were overturned, blood smeared across the floor. A few scattered snack bags remained, but the place had clearly been looted. Ethan stepped inside, gripping his knife. The air smelled of death. He moved silently, scanning the aisles for anything useful. A half-crushed granola bar, a can of soup with no label, and, lucky break, a full water bottle tucked behind the register. Then he heard it. A soft rustling. Not the slow, dragging sound of the infected, something else. A living person. Ethan turned, knife raised. From behind the counter, a figure emerged. A man in his late 30s, gaunt and desperate-looking, holding a crowbar. His clothes were filthy, his face covered in a thick beard. "Easy," the man rasped, raising a hand. "I don't want trouble." Ethan didn't lower his knife. Then put the crowbar down. The man hesitated but complied, setting the weapon on the counter. Ethan studied him. He had the look of someone barely scraping by, thin, exhausted, clinging to life by a thread. "You alone?" Ethan asked. The man nodded. "Name's Carter." Ethan wasn't sure if he believed him. Trust was dangerous. People were just as deadly as the undead in this world. Carter eyed Ethan's backpack. "You got food?" Ethan tightened his grip on his knife. "Why?" "Because I'll trade you something good." Carter reached into his coat and pulled out a single bullet. .45 caliber. "You got a gun?" Ethan did. An empty one. A bullet could mean the difference between life and death. After a long pause, Ethan sighed and tossed him the granola bar. Carter caught it eagerly, ripping it open and devouring it in seconds. "Been a while since I ate," he mumbled. Ethan pocketed the bullet. "You know any safe places?" Carter wiped his mouth. "Yeah. There's an old military bunker just outside the city. Word is, some folks set up a community there. Might be worth checking out." Ethan considered this. A safe place? It sounded too good to be true. But it was better than being alone. "Show me," Ethan said. Carter nodded. "Let's move before more of them show up." Ethan followed, knowing he might be walking into danger. But in this world, every choice was a gamble. Ethan followed Carter through the ruins of the city, moving like shadows between wrecked cars and abandoned buildings. The undead were everywhere, lurking in alleyways, shuffling aimlessly through the streets. One wrong move, and they'd be swarmed. Carter claimed the bunker was just outside the city, tucked away in an old military outpost. If that was true, it could be the break Ethan needed. A secure place to rest, resupply, maybe even other survivors he could trust. If only things were ever that simple. After nearly an hour of sneaking through the ruins, they finally reached the outskirts. The cityscape gave way to an overgrown highway, cracked asphalt vanishing into a thick wall of trees. "There," Carter said, pointing ahead. Ethan squinted. At the base of a rocky hillside, a rusted chain-link fence surrounded what looked like an old underground bunker. The gate was partially open, swaying slightly in the wind. The entrance itself was a massive steel door built into the rock, barely visible beneath layers of grime and vines. It looked abandoned. Too abandoned. Something felt wrong. Ethan gripped his knife. "You sure this place is safe?" Carter smirked. "Only one way to find out." They crept toward the entrance, stepping carefully over broken concrete and discarded bullet casings. Ethan took that as a bad sign. Someone had been here. And judging by the silence, they weren't here anymore. Carter moved ahead, peering inside. "Looks clear." Ethan wasn't convinced. He stepped inside cautiously, his senses on high alert. The bunker was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering emergency lamps along the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. Blood. Ethan's pulse quickened. He ran a hand over the wall until he found a light switch. With a flick, dim overhead lights sputtered to life, casting eerie shadows through the corridor. That's when he saw them. Bodies. Scattered across the floor, some fresh, others little more than skeletal remains. Blood splattered the walls, dried handprints smeared across the concrete. It wasn't a safe haven. It was a graveyard. Carter, Ethan said, his voice low. What the hell is this? Carter didn't answer. Ethan turned, instinct screaming at him. A gun cocked. He barely had time to react before Carter had a pistol aimed at his chest. Sorry, man, Carter said, his expression hard. But supplies are running low, and you've got something I need. Ethan's jaw clenched. You set me up. Carter shrugged. Like you said, every choice is a gamble. Before Ethan could move, a noise echoed through the bunker. A low, guttural growl. Carter's eyes darted to the shadows. The dead weren't just outside. They were here. And they were waking up. Ethan didn't hesitate. The moment Carter's attention wavered, he lunged. A gunshot rang out. The bullet whizzed past Ethan's head, shattering a light fixture above. Glass rained down as Ethan grabbed Carter's wrist, shoving the gun away. The weapon fired again, the echo bouncing off the cold concrete walls. Then, the real nightmare began. From the depths of the bunker, the moans of the undead grew louder. Shadows shifted as rotting figures emerged from the darkness, drawn by the gunfire. Their sunken eyes locked onto the two men, lips peeling back to reveal jagged, blood-stained teeth. Carter swore, struggling to break free. You idiot! Now they're coming! Ethan drove his knee into Carter's stomach. The man grunted, stumbling back. Seizing the moment, Ethan twisted the gun from Carter's grip and smashed it across his face. Carter collapsed against the wall, groaning. Damn it! Ethan didn't wait for him to recover. He turned and sprinted down the corridor, the undead closing in fast. His boots pounded against the floor as he weaved through the narrow hallway, passing more bloodied corpses and overturned crates. The exit had to be close. He could still make it. A door burst open ahead. More zombies spilled out, blocking his path. Their skin hung loose, their bodies riddled with old bullet wounds. They reached for him, clawing the air with bony fingers. Ethan skidded to a halt, heart hammering. He was trapped. Heavy footsteps pounded behind him. Carter was back on his feet, blood dripping from his nose. Not looking good for you, buddy, he taunted. Ethan spun around, aiming Carter's own gun at him. Stay back. Carter smirked. That thing's empty, remember? Damn it. He was right. A zombie lunged from the side. Ethan ducked just in time, slamming the gun into its skull. The creature reeled back, but more were closing in. The smell of rot filled his lungs. No way out. Carter laughed. Guess this is it for you. Ethan's mind raced. Think. There had to be another way. Then, he saw it, a rusted air vent near the ceiling. Without a second thought, he leaped onto a nearby crate and grabbed the vent's edge. He pulled himself up, muscles straining, as rotting hands clawed at his boots. The metal groaned under his weight, but he forced himself forward, crawling deeper into the duct. Below, Carter cursed. You son of a... His words were cut off by a blood-curdling scream. Ethan glanced back through the vent slats. The undead had reached him. Carter fought desperately, swinging wildly, but it was no use. The horde overwhelmed him, dragging him down beneath a sea of gnashing teeth and grasping hands. His screams faded into wet, sickening crunches. Ethan turned away. He crawled through the vent, ignoring the stench of decay, until he spotted another grate leading outside. Kicking it open, he dropped down into the cool night air. He was free. But he wasn't safe. Not yet. With one last look at the doomed bunker, Ethan took off into the wilderness. Alone once again. Ethan ran until his lungs burned, the bunker's horrors fading behind him. The night was cold, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees swallowed him, their twisted branches forming a skeletal canopy overhead. He needed to regroup. To think. But there was no time. A distant howl shattered the silence, not an animal, not human. It was the undead. And they were close. Ethan cursed under his breath. He'd drawn too much attention. Carter's betrayal had nearly cost him his life, and now the horde had his scent. Pushing forward, he stumbled upon an abandoned cabin nestled between the trees. Its wooden walls were weathered, its windows shattered. But it was shelter. And he needed that more than anything. He forced the door open and stepped inside. Dust coated every surface. An old hunting rifle lay on the table, rusted but intact. His heart leaped, until he checked the chamber. Empty. Still, he grabbed it. A weapon was better than nothing. Barricading the door with a heavy dresser, he took a deep breath and listened. Silence. Then, a sharp thud against the wall. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. Another thud. Then another. They'd found him. The first zombie smashed against the window, its rotting face pressing against the glass, teeth snapping hungrily. More figures emerged from the darkness, their moans rising into a sickening chorus. The cabin wouldn't hold. Ethan scanned the room, mind racing. The back door, his only escape, was barely hanging on its hinges. If he ran now, he'd be exposed. If he stayed, he'd be cornered. A loud crash echoed through the cabin as the front door buckled. Splintering would rain down as the first zombie forced its way in. Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung the rifle like a club, the stock cracking against the creature's skull. It staggered but didn't fall. Another one lunged through the broken window. Too many. Ethan turned and sprinted toward the back door, slamming through it just as the horde poured inside. He didn't stop running. Not this time. Branches whipped against his face, but he pushed forward, the sound of pursuit close behind. His only chance was to find higher ground, somewhere defensible. Then, through the trees, he saw it. An old watchtower. Hope surged through him. If he could make it up there, he'd have the high ground. A chance to fight back. Digging deep, he sprinted toward the ladder, gripping the rungs with aching fingers. He climbed fast, every muscle screaming in protest. Below, the horde reached the base. They clawed at the tower, moaning in frustration. Ethan reached the top, gasping for breath. He scanned the platform, an old signal flare sat near the edge. A final, desperate idea formed in his mind. He grabbed the flare, struck it against the railing, and watched as the red glow ignited the darkness. Then, he threw it. The flare landed near an overturned truck in the distance. The zombies, drawn to the light, turned and staggered toward it, their moans fading into the night. It worked. Ethan slumped against the railing, exhaustion washing over him. For now, he was safe. But he knew this wasn't over. The world was still broken. And he was still alone. The only question left was, how much longer could he keep surviving? Ethan sat on the edge of the watchtower, his breath still heavy from the chase. Below, the last of the undead staggered toward the distant flare, drawn away from his position. For now, he had won. But how many more times could he outrun death? His body ached, his stomach twisted in hunger. His water bottle was nearly empty. Supplies were running low. He couldn't keep this up forever. As the adrenaline faded, the crushing weight of loneliness settled in. He hadn't spoken to another living soul since Carter. And Carter. Ethan clenched his jaw. The betrayal still stung, but he had no time for regret. The dead didn't care about emotions. He scanned the horizon, searching for his next move. From his vantage point, the ruins of the city stretched to the west. To the east, the highway disappeared into the unknown. Then, movement. Not a zombie. Far in the distance, past the tree line, a flicker of light. A campfire. His pulse quickened. It could be a trap. Another ambush. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a chance? Ethan debated with himself, but deep down, he already knew his decision. he had spent too long surviving. If there was even a sliver of hope, he had to take it. Climbing down from the tower, he moved cautiously through the woods, keeping low. The fire remained steady, glowing like a beacon in the night. As he drew closer, he spotted figures, 3 of them. A man and 2 women, all armed, sitting around the flames. Survivors. Ethan's chest tightened. He could turn back. Keep going alone. Stay safe. Or he could take a chance. Stepping into the firelight, he raised his hands in surrender. I'm not looking for trouble. The survivors turned sharply, weapons drawn. Tension crackled in the air. Then, after a long silence, the man lowered his gun first. Neither are we. Ethan exhaled. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to be. The end.